All right, you guys are fortunately or unfortunately the first uh, people to ever see this content. When this topic came up, um, it was an interesting topic that others have asked for, but no one's ever really spent the time to research exactly how it should be done or shouldn't be done. And so you guys are the first people to ever get this material. So hopefully you'll enjoy it, but you can always say, hey, we were the ones that got to see it first. So there you go. So with this material, we are going to cover a lot of information, but there will be some PowerPoints and some demo. So you'll see bits and pieces. I'll constantly be moving between the two. But as I said, this is being recorded, so you can always refer back to it. I also have in the PowerPoint slides links to some resources for much more detailed information, because in the space of this hour, we can't really get into huge amounts of detail, but hopefully you'll have enough to at least know where to begin and how the process works. So just kind of an initial surface topic here, public-facing dashboards. The reason people aren't currently doing that today is because in order to use Pyramid's BI Office application, you have to log in as a particular Windows account. And that login requirement is kind of what prevents people from being able to open up this content to the world, so to speak. And so what we're going to be walking through is the process for configuring BI Office to work with a hard-coded account. Here you can see I'm calling it anonymous access. It's technically not really anonymous. What you're doing is you're going to see how you can actually set it up so that you could hard code a particular account and use that account to log in to BI Office and show the information. So therefore, you're never prompting the user for a password, but under the covers, a password and username are being sent to BI Office, okay? So just a quick background on myself. As I said, my name is Jason Picker. I'm a senior sales engineer at Pyramid Analytics. I've been with Pyramid for a little over 2 years now, and I've worked in the business intelligence space since 1995. So as they say, I've been around the block for a while on this type of work, but specifically with Pyramid over the last 2 years. So here's the slide that's going to probably freak everybody out. So in order to fully implement what we're going to be talking about today, there are 4 types of rights that you need to have. First of all, you need to have Active Directory administration rights, BI Office administration rights, BI Office content developer rights, which means report building rights, and then lastly, website development rights. Now, the reality is in almost every organization, there will not be a single person that has all 4 of these rights or capabilities. What that means is in order to implement a public-facing dashboard, you will have to involve a team of people to make this thing work. In my case, when I go through and show you all of this, I technically have all 4 of those rights on my own machine, and so I'll be able to demonstrate them for you. But the reality is you're going to most likely need to involve other people in order to accomplish this task, okay? And so I'll point out as we go through where these specific rights need to come into play, but ultimately you need somebody that understands each one of these 4 different areas, how to deal with users in Active Directory, how to administer BI Office, how to create reports and content, and then ultimately how to build a website. All right, so those are the skills required, and As you can see, it is not for the faint of heart, which is why none of you have done it up to this point. If it were easy, we wouldn't even be having this session. So what this is going to do is it's going to outline the steps, and the steps themselves are not difficult. So none of these processes are difficult. It's just there's a number of steps you have to go through to pull this off. All right, so here's the agenda for the session today. We're going to start out by talking about user security and how security can be managed and should be managed within the BI Office interface. We're then going to talk about content security. We'll then cover a topic called URL parameterization, which basically allows you to point to a piece of content through a URL. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the part that makes all of it tick or ultimately work. The foundation for this whole process is something called federated forms authentication. And so we're going to cover all of those topics in our session today. And hopefully by the end of the session, you'll at least understand the process. And then when it comes to actually implementing this on your own site, you can feel free to leverage our support organization at Pyramid to make the most of your requirements there. All right. So let's dive right into user security. So in order to make this work, you're going to need, as I mentioned earlier, to hard code a specific user account in your web page, so that way it logs in for all of your external users. However, what I'm going to present here in the next two slides, user security and content security, these are what I would call the best practices or my recommendations, okay? You do not have to follow steps 1 and 2 here, the user security and the folder security. However, if you plan on implementing public-facing content, if you follow these steps, it will make it very simple and easy to manage, okay? So this first step is setting up user security. For the IT folks on the line, one of the things that IT is always concerned about is security. Who's accessing what content, okay? The reality is you could set this up and hard code your own user credentials in a website and have everything log in using your Windows credentials. However, that is not recommended, and in most cases, it'll probably violate your corporate security policies. So as such, what I recommend, or what we recommend, is that you actually create a Windows account specifically for this purpose. Now, in order to create the Windows account, you will have to be an Active Directory administrator, or at a bare minimum, you need to be a server administrator on the box that BI Office is installed in. But it's preferable to have an AD account, but you could get away with just a basic local Windows account. All right, so we're going to take a look at these 3 steps. We're going to create a Windows account. We're going to add that account as a user in BI Office, and then we're going to create a BI Office role specifically for this account. And once again, these are all recommendations or best practices. You can do this without going through these steps. So let's actually take a look at the process here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my server administrator. In my case, I'm doing local Windows accounts, but in your site, you would most likely want to do an Active Directory account. And so what you'll see is on my local machine, I've got a number of users, and I created a user called Pyramid Anonymous. All right. So it doesn't really matter what the username is called. You can call it anything you would like. I'm just creating an account called Pyramid Anonymous, and that's the account that I'm going to use to make this thing work. So once I've got that user account created, I am going to log in to the BI Office administration console, and then I'm going to go to my users tab, and I'm going to add a user, and I'm going to look for, in this case, my Pyramid anonymous account, and I'm going to go ahead and add them to the system. Okay, now here's the part that is really important to think about when you're doing this. If you're going to expose some content to a public facing website, you really need to think about what level of interactivity does that content need to contain. I would kind of pose that 9 times out of 10, all you really want in that environment is a very simple user interface, meaning I don't want the users drilling up, drilling down, dicing, exporting, all of that stuff. Really, all I want them to do is be able to see the content, and perhaps if I want to give them a little bit of interactivity, I'm going to give them the ability to play with slicers or filters. So because of that, when you set up this account, what you should be doing is you should be setting up the user as a viewer license type. So that way you can make sure that they don't have any other capabilities when they're seeing that public-facing website. So you want to set up this account using a viewer license, and that will limit their capability just right out of the gate. So that is definitely a recommendation. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel this because I actually already did this. You can see I set it up with a user or a client license of a viewer, and then I created a role. And you'll see all of the different roles that I have. I created a specific role for this purpose. I just called the role anonymous. Once again, the names of these things are not important. You can name them whatever makes the most sense to you. You could call it public content, public dashboard, public facing, whatever. It's entirely up to you. I'm just creating that role, and I'm making sure that this user belongs to that particular role. Okay. Now, one of the things I guess I should have put that on the PowerPoint slide, but when you add a user, and specifically when you add a role to BI Office, you want to make sure that you grant that role the correct privileges to the data. So what that means is there's 2 things that you're going to have to do. First of all, in the administrative console, you're going to have to go to your data sources and make sure whichever SSAS server contains the data that you're going to ultimately expose into the dashboard, you need to make sure that you add that new role, in this case the anonymous role, to that data source, because otherwise they won't be able to connect to that data source. So you want to make sure that you add that user to that role, and that will give you the ability to see that data source for that user. So I did forget to include that in the PowerPoint slide, so just want to make sure I cover that. The other piece of this is the actual data security itself. So if I go back over here to SQL Server Analysis Services, whether it's tabular or multidimensional, it really doesn't matter. But whatever SSAS server you're using, for the database that you're working with, you want to make sure that you give that user access. Now you'll see in this particular database, I've got 2 roles, one called secured data and the other called anonymous. Okay, so I created a specific role for the anonymous user. So if I look at this, what you'll see is there's my user that I've given access to this data. You don't have to create a separate role. If your data is kind of an all or nothing security, meaning your security determines whether or not they can see all of the data or none of the data, then you can go ahead and just make sure that this anonymous user is added to that existing role. In my case, this particular database, the secured data role actually secures it by by salesperson, and that salesperson data is driven by some table. For those of you that that joined me on the webinar a couple weeks ago covering data security, this is an example of a cube that has that dynamic data security. So in this case, I went ahead and created a separate role and just added that user to that role. Okay, so make sure that you give them access to the data in SSAS, and you give them access to the server, the data source server in the data source dialog box. Okay, so those are the steps. Create the user, add it to BI Office, create a role, add the user to the role, and then grant that role the privilege to see the appropriate data sources. All right, so that is step number one to get us going. We've got to set the user up that we're going to leverage for this anonymous access. Okay, step number two is content security. Once again, content security, this is a recommendation. You don't have to do this, but it just makes it easier to maintain. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to create a special folder in the public domain. Now this has to be in the public domain in order to leverage a user that is using a viewer license type or a consumer license type. If you happen to decide to use an analyst or a professional license type for this purpose, then you could put the folder in the group area. But in this case, I'm going to create a special folder in the public domain. I'm going to then add content to that folder. And the benefit of doing this is it's going to be very easy for you to understand which content do I have available to me to show in a public-facing website. So if it's all contained in a single folder, then it's going to be much easier to manage. And then lastly, you might want to think about assigning a custom profile to the content, and we'll talk about what a custom profile is here in a second. But these are the steps. We're going to create a folder in public. We're going to then add content to that folder, and then we're going to assign a custom profile. So let's go look at our BI Office server, and you'll see here in the public domain, in the public content, I've actually created a folder here called Anonymous. Now, the important thing when you create this folder is you want to set the security so that really you limit who has access to this folder. In this case, you'll see I've given the anonymous role read access to the folder. And then the admins have write access. And then I went ahead and gave another group, in this case my report developers, read access so that they can see what's in the folder, but they cannot add or modify the things that are in that folder. So I'm controlling that by the admin's role. Only the admins can put content in there. You don't have to do it this way at all, but this is just my recommendation. You want to limit the access to the folder to a small group of people so that way you can keep a tight control on what goes in there. So what you'll see in this particular instance, I've got a series of reports and I've got a single dashboard. Okay, so when I add my content to this folder, by default, it will inherit the security of the folder. For those of you that aren't familiar with the folder security, you will see up here there is a button that says propagate roles. So what you can do is after you add all of your content to that folder, you can just click on the propagate roles button and it will make sure all of this content matches the security at the folder level. The reality is, regardless of what the security is at the content level, it cannot violate the folder security. So if you've not given somebody write access to a folder, but for the specific content you've given them write access, they will not actually be able to write into that folder. Okay, so you can't violate the security, but sometimes it's nice to keep them in sync. Okay, so you add your content there, you make sure that your security looks good, and then I mentioned that there is this concept of a profile. So to take a look at a profile, what a profile does is it allows you as the BI Office administrator to actually ratchet down the capability that a user has when they're looking at specific content. So things like drill up and drill down, dicing, sorting and filtering, exporting, all of those features you can actually take away from your users regardless of their license type. And the way that you do that is in the admin console, you'll see that there is a tab called Profiles. And what you'll see is I've created a profile called Highly Restrictive. All you have to do is click on Add a New Profile and then give that profile a name. And then you can see here all of the features that you can actually take away. So I can take away drill up and drill down, dicing, focus, actions. I can just check all of these boxes and remove all of these features or capabilities. And so I did that here for this highly restrictive one. You'll see I turned off just about everything within this environment. And then once I've got the profile created, then I can actually apply that profile to the content. So you'll see here I've got this content called Sales Dashboard. I've given the anonymous user read access, but I would like to restrict what that user can do. So I'm going to go ahead and assign them the profile of highly restricted. Okay, so the only thing at this point this user can do is change the values of the filter or the slicer. They can't do anything else to that data. And typically with a public-facing dashboard, that's what you want, because you don't want to have to explain to them how drill down works, how dicing works, or any of those other features. You just want to let them be able to change some filters, and that's it. So I've applied that here. I've also applied that to my report. So this is applied at the content level, so that I can restrict when users access that content, I can restrict what they can do. All right, so that's step number 2. You create a folder, you assign that anonymous user or the anonymous role to the folder, you add content to that folder, and then you set the profile for that content to be highly restrictive. All right. That's step number 2. Let's go on to step number 3. All right, step number 3 is something called URL parameterization. So in order to access BI Office content on a public website, you need to have access to the URL for that specific piece of content. So what we're going to do here is we're going to see how do we get the URL for the content we're interested in, and then you want to think about adding some additional parameters to the URL to minimize the screen noise. I'll talk about that in a second. This particular topic for URL parameterization, there is actually a full PDF guide that explains how the URL parameterization works in BI Office, and there's a lot of things that you can tweak on the URL to access our content, and so you can refer to that guide for much more detail. But what we're going to do is we're just going to play around with a couple properties, and so I'll show you that document here in a second. So let's start with how do we get the URL to begin with. Okay, so the way that we do that is, first of all, it depends on the content type as to what's the best or simplest approach. If we're talking about a dashboard, then all we have to do is click on the dashboard, and you'll see over here in the dashboard, these buttons here, there is a button that says Open Link. So I can click on that button, and what it will actually show you is the URL that will take you straight to that dashboard. Okay? There's a couple things to be aware of in this dialog box. You'll notice there's some check boxes here that we can turn some features off. The one that I would recommend right out of the gate, if you're going to do this on a public-facing website, you absolutely want to make sure that you check this box, open in HTML5. The reason is, if you do not check that, by default, it might try to open it in Silverlight. And as many of you are aware, the Silverlight component primarily only works with IE and to some extent Safari, and if you haven't upgraded your Firefox, you might be able to get it to work in Firefox. But HTML5 will work with almost any browser, as long as it's a modern browser. Anything from IE, I think it's IE 10 and above, will work with HTML5, and then any of the other browsers, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, just about anything else. So you want to make sure absolutely you check this box, okay? When you do that, the URL itself actually changes. So you'll see if it's unchecked, it's going to a page called default. If you check it, it goes to a page called HTML5, all right? So this is how you're going to get your initial URL to point to the content you want to show on your web page. So you can just copy this content, and then we can use that content in the website that we're going after. So I'm just going to paste it here in Notepad for right now, just to show you what that URL looks like. And then I'm going to show you the document that talks about all of the URL parameters. So this is that document that the link is in the PowerPoint slide. You'll see all of the different parameters. They actually explain each one of these parameters and what they do or what they look like. They even give you examples in the document. But the ones that we're most concerned with are these ones right here, this WS and WB, or WSB. These actually determine what capabilities are available within the screen, meaning, do I show the pyramid logo? Do I actually give them the ability, if it's a dashboard, do I actually show them the little wheel menu that lets them print and export and save and all of that? So these two properties allow you to affect those sorts of things. What the kind of the Chrome, the stuff around the view looks like, and what capabilities are available. And so you can see what it's telling you the defaults are and what you can change. The best one to look at is this one right here. This WSB, setting WSB to 1 means there's not going to be any buttons visible. There's no navigation buttons to move from page to page. There's no button to take you back to the content repository to browse for more content, as well as the execute button doesn't exist there. So this is the one absolutely you want to work with, is this one, WSB1. But the rest of them you can play with. You can look at that document and get a lot of information. So you can see right here, this one says WSB0. I just want to change that to WSB1, and that's going to simplify the interface. All right. If you want to see an example of what this looks like, you'll see that there's a button here that just says Open Link. If I click on that button, it will launch the web page in another browser. Okay. And so here, I could play around with the interface. So I could certainly type in the WSB1 and run that again. And so now when I click on this, you'll see the only options I have now are to just rerun the query. I don't have, prior to that, if I had left it at WSB0 and run this, what you would see, oh, actually in this case, that's right, I turned that piece off. The other thing is this one right here is dashboard panel on. If I set this one to false, then specifically with the dashboard, you'll notice the pyramid logo goes away. Okay, so you'll want to play around with those parameters to get it to look exactly like you want it. That document explains all of them and shows you how those things work. Okay, so with the dashboard, it's really simple. You click on open link, make sure you set the HTML5 option, and then you can play around with the parameters. When you're talking about a report, you don't actually want to do the open link, because what this will do is it will start with the first page in the report document. You'll notice in this case, I've got 4 pages. So if I want the first page, then I can just go through here. But let's say that I actually want this page number 3 here. To get the URL to page number 3, of course we get to error out here. That's fun. Let's try this one instead. Apparently that page number 3 is having some issues. I'll go to page number 2 here. Let's see if we can open that one up. No, all right, we're doing great. All of a sudden, everything's misbehaving. Okay, so here's an interesting example. If I want this particular page to show up on a public-facing website, to get the URL to this page, I just need to make sure this page is active. I will then go to the File menu, and you'll see that there's a menu option called Share. If I click on that Share menu option, one of the ones that I get is something called Send Email Link. If I click on that Send Email Link, I can actually see that there is a Create Link option. Once again, I can check the box to make sure that I'm showing HTML5, but now this URL is going to go straight to that specific report, okay? And ultimately, for those of you that are kind of curious, the way that this works is you'll see the book ID is the name of the report document. And then you'll see down below there is a parameter called report that has the ID of the specific report that you're looking at. So I can just make sure that I select the report as the active report, go to File, Share, Send Email Link, Create Link, and then there's the URL that I want for that specific report. Okay, so I'm just going to copy that one. We'll paste it over here once again in my notepad just so that I can see that one. So this top one here was my dashboard. And this one right here was my report. All right, so those are my 2 URLs examples, one from a dashboard, one from a report, that I'm going to need in order to point to this content in a public-facing website. All right, so that is step number 3. You have to grab that URL and then potentially make some modifications to the URL parameters to get rid of all the screen noise, all the other capabilities. All right, step number 4, and this is actually the most difficult step, is to set up federated forms authentication. So the way that you do this, by default in most of your instances, you are using usually one of 2 primary authorization types in BI Office. You're either using basic authentication, which means when you log into BI Office, it prompts you for your password, or you're using Windows integrated authentication. With Windows integrated authentication, it just automatically connects you using your Windows account. okay? Basic and Windows integrated, they will not allow you to programmatically pass the username to BI Office, okay? So in order to do that, there is another authorization type or authentication type, and it's called federated forms. And federated forms is specifically designed to allow you to integrate the BI Office security with some other security, whether it's the security for your website, the security for your application, or whatever. Sometimes they refer to it as single sign-on. So federated forms is what you use to do single sign-on authentication. And so ultimately, we have to implement federated forms in order to impersonate a particular account when we're logging into BI Office, okay? So in order to get this working, there's 3 steps we need. First, step number 1 is we need to create a website or a web page that can impersonate a particular user. And I'm going to show you that. We will then need to install, and it's recommended we do this on a new server. You will install another copy of the BI Office website on another server using federated forms. The beauty of this, though, is it can work with the exact same repository. So even though it's on a separate server with a separate authentication, it's going to use the exact same repository so that the content is all managed in one place, okay? So we're going to do, and one of the reasons we want to put this on a new server is because if you're going to hit this from a public-facing website, you may need to actually set up this new server to be accessible from the internet, okay, as opposed to being accessible only inside your network. Okay, you would not want to put your standard BI Office server out there outside your firewall so that anybody and everybody can connect to it and you know, try to hack it. That server would be inside your network. But this server, you could potentially set it up so that it's outside your network. But this whole section here, this is why I said you really need somebody that is very familiar with how to build websites. They also need to be familiar with your firewall and how to set up web pages that work inside and outside your firewall. And so chances are that may not be you. So you will have to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through all 3 of these to show you the process. And you'll see there is a guide that we provide specifically talking about all the different types of authentication, federated forms being one of them. And so let's start with creating an anonymous website or web page. So to do this, what this will require is typically a tool like Visual Studio, where we're going to set up a web page in Visual Studio that can programmatically pass credentials to BI Office. And in order to do this, there are some steps that you will need to configure in Visual Studio to get this to work. The main step is that you actually need to set up a reference to the Pyramid Web Services. So if I were to actually just show you these properties, let's see if I can bring this up here. There we go. So you'll see in this case, I'm just pointing to the BI Office web service on my machine, and I've given this service a name. In this case, I've called it Pyramid API Service. You can call it whatever you need to. Once you've got that reference, then you need some code to actually set up this anonymous process. And so I've actually provided the code for you. In the handout, there will be the PowerPoint slide and this specific code right here. So you'll have a copy of this. But basically what we're doing is we're setting up a generic web page that will, in this case, it's just going to point to that URL that I grabbed from BI Office. So when the user logs into this web page, it's going to call this BI Office content and show that content, okay? But it's going to hard code the user in this instance. So what you'll see is down here, I'm actually logging into the web service using that anonymous account that I created in Windows. And then I'm calling this method called getCookie. I love this, the name of these things. So in here, we're actually creating a cookie that lasts for as long as the session lasts. And this cookie is going to have the credentials that are going to be used by BI Office. So in this case, what we're passing is the domain for the user, the username, the user password, and then the website domain that this account is working with, okay? And so the authentication documentation will talk all about this. Also, there's the web services API that'll go into this in more detail. But suffice it to say, you can see I'm hard coding a particular user. In this case, I'm hard coding a particular report, and then all I have to do is go browse to this report or to this web page, and it'll log me in automatically. So as an example, what I'm going to do is, well, once for you website developers, you probably know exactly what to do here, but once you've got that built, you can just build the website. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an example. Here's an example of a web page, and as you can see, my web page development skills are not that fantastic, but I've got this generic web page that has these three pieces of external information, but then right here in the lower right, this is BI Office content. It actually still works with the slicers that I have here, but you see there's none of that extra screen noise, and if I click on an item, you can see I cannot drill down on any of these items, okay, but this is now publicly available. So let me show you essentially how that works. So that web page that I showed you, the simple web page, it's just called, in this case, Anon1. And when I log into that web page, it's going to automatically show me the BI Office content. Once again, I don't have any sort of drill down capabilities here on any of this content, but I can manipulate the sliders or the slicers. Okay, so that is an example. Ultimately, what you have to get to is that web page. Once you've got that web page built, you can drop that web page into any other application, okay? And so one of the things that I did just to kind of give you some ideas, because obviously hard coding this one website or this one piece of BI Office content is not ideal, because you don't necessarily want to have to create a brand new web page for every piece of content you want to embed into your public domain or your public facing site. So I threw together another interesting example. In this example, I've actually set up some logic that lets me show one of 4 different web pages. Okay, and the way that I've set this up is I'm passing in a parameter that says which page should actually be shown when they embed it in their website. And so that's actually what I did in this example here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify the code for this web page, and we're going to see how this piece down here, this lower right piece, is going to change. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just using this web page that has multiple pieces of content, but the rest of it is still the same, hard coding the user and all of that. And this one is called page 1, and you'll see here with page 1, I'm calling that web page and then just passing a view number. And so in this case, maybe I want it to show view number 4. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to publish that web page. All right, and once that web page is published, I'm going to come back over here and I'm just going to refresh this web page. And what you're going to see is this piece of content now changes. Okay, looks like I've got some formatting issues with my content, but the content itself changed. So that's an example of instead of just hard coding a specific piece, you could design a web page that uses parameters, and if you want, you could actually make it so that the parameters themselves pass in the book ID and pass in the report ID as parameters, and then you could create something really simple and generic that would work with any content. But once again, remember, I'm using content that is in a specific folder, and I did that on purpose so that way I can control the interactivity, and also I make it easier for me to manage. I don't have to go find the content. It's all in one location, okay, when I need to make changes to the reports and all of that. So that's why I did that. But this is the ultimate thing that needs to occur to make that work, is you programmatically pass in a username and password. All right. So how do I get that that to work? I've got to set up BI Office in federated forms mode. So I'm going to walk you through that really quick. We're not going to actually implement all of it. I'm just going to show you where that's done. And so what I'm going to do is I've got this website that currently has BI Office on it, and I'm just going to run the deployment wizard. And I'm going to set up an instance of BI Office that has federated forms configured, but it uses the same database that everyone else is using on the other website. So in this case, I'm just going to click next, and you can see right here when I install it, it says, do you want to use an existing database or a new database? In this case, I'm going to use an existing database. I'm going to log in. And let's see. Hopefully I remember my password. And looks like I don't. I'm going to take a sneak peek. Oh, I forgot the number 1. And then here, when you set up your authentication, you'll see that there are actually 4 different authentication methods when you set up BI Office. One of those is federated forms. So you would actually need to select that, and then you would have to fill out this information, okay? So this is the process for configuring it. You could then click next and go through the rest of that process and install it. But ultimately, this is what is required to be able to programmatically pass in that user ID. And so that is the most difficult piece of this whole process, is getting federated forms configured. And our support organization can help you do that. So by all means, reach out to support@pyramidanalytics.com, and they will help you with the creation of the federated forms website. They can also assist with this anonymous website or web page creation as well. So by all means, reach out to support for that. Here's an example of one that's filled out where it's actually specifying the domain and the login page. And that's pretty much it. As you can see, there's a number of steps. The steps aren't necessarily super difficult. There's just lots of steps that you might end up going through. This is just the summary. The first thing we had to do was create a Windows user and a role in BI Office. We then had to create a public folder and then add content to the folder. We then retrieved the content URL and then created a website with a custom web page where we put that URL into that web page. And then we installed BI Office with federated forms authentication. And doing all of those steps together makes this process work. And the beauty is you only have to set this whole thing up once. Once it's set up, the process is very simple going forward to maintain. It's all about keeping content in that public folder up to date, adding as much content as you would like, and then being able to reference that content through the custom URLs. And so with that, I will open it up for questions. Looks like we do have a couple questions here. Let's see. The question says, if an end user who receives the link updates the parameters in the URL and tries to load the report, for example, with the buttons, will it work? Okay, that's a good question, and that's also why profiles are really important. If you use those custom profiles where you make it highly restrictive, you can revoke a lot of those capabilities. Okay. If you don't have a custom profile configured, then yes, if they somehow got a hold of the URL and started playing with the URL, they might be able to see those buttons where they could go back to browse the content and all of that. But the profile can prevent that from happening. Okay. There's also ways within your custom web pages to prevent that as well, so that you can prevent a user from seeing the URL and trying to then figure out how to access that URL. All right. Let's see. Another question, could this be set up to add tabs on the public-facing dashboard so that users can access more than one at a time without having to reload the web page? The answer is yes. The sample that I put together, I specifically only wanted one page, but if your dashboard has multiple pages in it and you've set it up to use the tabbed interface or even the full screen interface or any of those other interfaces that allow you to move between the pages, that can work just fine as is. You don't have to do anything special or different. I just chose not to implement one like that in my example. All right, let's see. Another question came in, is there a way to keep track of the log as to who is viewing it? So this is an excellent question with respect to thinking about anonymous access. Okay, if all of my users are logging in with the same credentials, the best that I can see is that that account, in my case, the Pyramid Anonymous account, is logging into content. I don't know who actually hit it. So if it is important for you to know who is actually accessing that content, what you want to do is, instead of implementing this as an anonymous user, meaning as a hard-coded user, you actually want to use the full capability of federated forms, which what it would allow you to do is, let's say as an example, maybe on your public-facing website, you actually have a way for a user to register with your website. So when they log into your website, they log in with some sort of ID. It's not a Windows account. It has nothing to do with BI Office. It's just some account on your website. You can use that same code that I showed you for the anonymous, and you can actually provide a mechanism for mapping the user from one account to another account. So therefore, the user never has to log into BI Office, but programmatically you are in fact logging in for them converting it from their application account to a Windows account. And so the documentation on the federated forms definitely covers how to do that. And you can also reach out to support for more details on that particular process. All right, let's see. I think there was one more web or question I received. Let's see. Let's see. This other one asked, let's see, could there be a way to freeze the URL properties? Like I said, you would have to talk to someone, one of your website developers. They would probably have better ideas as to what all you could do there, but definitely take advantage of profiles that can keep users from being able to override some of the things if you use those profiles. But then the second one was, rather than creating a web page, can we use as an example a SharePoint pass-through with a direct HTML5 link? This option would not include a programmatically integrated username and password, but could create a guest credential or something. The quick answer to that part of the question is yes, there are other options. In fact, one of the options that I've been trying to investigate but have yet to get it to work is within IIS itself. You can actually set up a website in IIS that is an anonymous website, meaning it never prompts users for any sort of credentials. And when you set up a website as an anonymous website, you can in IIS hard code credentials that are used in that website. Like I said, unfortunately, I was not able to get it to work, but I would not consider myself a website developer. So someone that knows how to do that, they potentially could do that. And same thing with SharePoint. If you've got a web page that has the ability to be represented as some other Windows account, regardless of what that account is, whether it's a guest account or whatever, you can use that account to do all of this. You don't have to create a new account. You don't have to write all that code. You can use some other mechanism. But in this particular instance, if you were to call Pyramid support today and say, hey, I'm trying to set up a public-facing dashboard that doesn't require users to log in, how would I do that? This is the approach that they would recommend, is that you set up federated forms and you programmatically log in for the user. But that's not to say there aren't other ways that you could accomplish this same task. Ultimately, BI Office just has to have a Windows account to know who it is that's logging in, to know what they can or can't see. Okay, and that's the ultimate requirement there. All right, are there any other questions out there? If so, feel free to unmute your phone and ask it, or you can type it in the chat window. Otherwise, I will thank you once again for letting me present this to you. Hopefully you found it interesting and informative. Chances are you probably won't retain half of what we talked about because there was a lot there, but this recording will become available probably by next week sometime from Blackboard. If, however, you have specific questions about implementing it on your site, you can feel free to email me at jason.picker@pyramidanalytics.com or reach out to support@pyramidanalytics.com and we will certainly help you out. Let's see, we did get one more question come in. Is it possible in the near future that this will be a standard part of the GUI of BI Office? The quick answer is yes, it is very possible. In fact, one of the things that has been added recently to BI Office is specifically licensing for anonymous access. So if I go look at my application license, you'll see that in all of the features that my license contains, one of those says anonymous viewer access. Okay, for all of you Blackboard customers, when you get this product from Blackboard, it comes with the anonymous viewer access rights. Okay, so right now this just means from a licensing standpoint, you are covered to set up a couple of these on a public facing website. But in the future, we may most likely provide some sort of web page that would automatically allow this capability for you in the future. But right now we don't have the web page that does it, but just from the licensing type, we do make that as part of the product that you get from Blackboard. All right. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you once again for your time, and we look forward to a session like this again next time. Anything like this, by all means, reach out to Blackboard and let them know additional sessions that you would like to have, and we can arrange for these sessions for the future. Thank you very much. You guys have a good day.